might spend a little bit of extra time on this one. I'm flying through pretty quick because, it's the current situation. It's pretty factual, and there's not much we can do about it. I got a question there. Does RMD apply to Roth? The answer is no, as long as you or your spouse is living. So as long as you are living, you do not have to take RMDs out of your Roth account. Okay. That's another change to 401ks. Previously, you did have to take RMDs out of a Roth 401k. Now you do not. Okay. Your spouse, when you die, can inherit your Roth IRA and also not have to take RMDs out of them. A non-spousal beneficiary, your kids or grandkids, somebody else can inherit your Roth IRA, but then they do have to take required minimum distributions. The government's not going to just let that money sit there and grow and be tax-free forever. Eventually, somebody's going to have to get it out of there. And it may be, a generation down the line, but somebody's going to get it out of there. Good question. All right, go back. All right, Medicare. I want to take a minute here. Medicare, if you've ever been through a Medicare annual enrollment period, you know how it works. You've got your plan, whether it's a supplement and a prescription plan or a Medicare Advantage plan. During the fall enrollment period, October 15th to December 7th, that's the time when you have an opportunity to review your plan, review the new plans for next year, and see if you need to make a change. And of course, we help you do that. And you can come in and sit down with us. We'll put in all your prescriptions and your doctors and the benefits and see, if your plan is good, we're going to tell you it's good. Just keep it. And if there's going to be a better plan for next year, we're going to tell you we need to sign you up for this better plan. Okay. That is going to be a huge mess this year because of one little piece of legislation called the Inflation Reduction Act. The Inflation Reduction Act had a lot of pieces to it. There's some environmental stuff, some fossil fuel stuff. There was some funding the IRS, adding IRS agents. The biggest part of it that is going to affect the most people is the Medicare component. So the first thing that it did was it took the Trump enacted $35 monthly out-of-pocket cap on insulin. Trump started that. The Inflation Reduction Act codified it into law. So now, and starting in 2024, anybody on Medicare Part D on insulin will pay no more than $35 for a month's supply of insulin. That now applies to all plans and all insulins, $35. Prior to this year, it was every plan didn't have to participate, and it didn't apply to every brand or version of insulin, but now it does. So the Inflation Reduction Act codified that into law. Probably not a terrible thing. Now, changes that are going into effect in 2025 are the ones that are really getting to us. Now, the other thing that started this year, before I move ahead, is there's phases to the prescription drug coverage of Medicare Part D, and you start out in the deductible phase, and then you go into the copay phase. If you have expensive drugs, you'll end up in the donut hole, that gap phase. And if you make it out of the gap phase, you go into what's called the catastrophic phase, where prior to 2024, this year, you would only pay 5%. Medicare and the plan would cover 95% of your bill, and you would be responsible for 5% until the end of the year. January 1st starts all over again. The Inflation Reduction Act, I'm just going to say IRA, starting in 2024, this year, eliminated the 5% out of pocket in the catastrophic phase. So if you go through the initial phase, through the donut hole, and get to the catastrophic phase, your out of pocket in the catastrophic phase is currently zero. That's going to continue 2025. The big change in 2025 is that a overall $2,000 out-of-pocket spending cap goes into effect. So essentially, there's no more donut hole and there's no more really catastrophic phase. It's just the deductible phase, the initial phase. If you hit $2,000 out of pocket, you're done. That sounds good. And it is. It's going to be good for some people. Who pays for that? Well, it's paid partly with the drug manufacturers, partly from the insurance company, and partly from Medicare, partly from taxpayers. Okay, so all three of those, once you get to that $2,001 for the rest of the year, all three of those entities are coming together and footing the bill. Well, the majority of that responsibility was placed on the insurance companies, your Part D provider. Okay, well, let's face it, these Part D companies, they're insurance companies, their purpose for existing is to make a profit. And if you're going to require them to pay out more in expenses, well, they need to take in more money to remain profitable, or what happens? They're not the government. They can't just print money. They have to bring in more money than they put out, or they go out of business and they go away, right? So what do they have to do to make up for that loss? Is they have to raise premiums. So some of you have a plan that's got a 50-cent per month premium. Some of you have a plan that's got a $6 a month premium, $12, $25, or $48. Well, all of those were going up. And we're in the midst of that time every year when it's August 29th. We should have known from the insurance companies what these premiums are going to be by now. We don't know anything yet. We don't know what premiums are going to be. We don't know what copays are going to be. We don't know what drugs are going to be covered. So they raise the premiums. They reduce the number of drugs that they cover. They change the formularies around. They raise the copays. All of that is changing. That's important to know. I'm gonna tell you why that's so important right now. Not because it's going to cost you more. It is, but there's another reason. So I just wanted to go back and look and say, okay, well, how many people is this actually going to help? I always think, hey, if we can put a cap on out-of-pocket cost, that's a good thing. That's going to help people. How many people is it going to help? $2,000 doesn't sound like a lot to me, because I know what a lot of people are paying. Way more than $2,000. I've got people paying $2,000 a month, more than that a month, for certain drugs, cancer drugs, Parkinson's drugs, MS drugs. There's some special drugs that Medicare does cover, but they still have enormous out-of-pocket costs. So I wanted to try to see how many people are going to be helped by this. And so the newest data that's available from Medicare was 2001. And so in 2001, there were 1.5 million Part D enrollees, people who were actually enrolled in Medicare Part D, either through a standalone prescription drug plan with a supplement or a Medicare Advantage plan with prescription drug coverage. There were 1.5 million of those who actually paid more than $2,000 in out-of-pocket costs for their drugs in 2001. There were 48 million people enrolled in Part D. So out of 48 million people enrolled in Part D, 1.5 million of them actually paid more than $2,000. That's 3.1%. Less than that of the total amount of Medicare beneficiaries. There's actually, in 2001, there were 63.7 million people enrolled in Medicare, but this particular statistic doesn't apply to the ones that aren't enrolled in Part D. So we're just going to look at that smaller number, 48 million. 3.1%, 1.5 million people out of 48 million would have been positively impacted by this change. So I said, well, okay, well, let's extrapolate this out. And these sources, by the way, there's whitehouse.gov. So that's the White House. That is going to be biased towards whoever's in the White House. However, everything here is factual. I can't say that anything here is not true. And another source for the statistics down here comes from kff.org, which is the Kaiser Family Foundation. I find them to be pretty objective when it comes to just informing you about healthcare news. Kaiser Family Foundation, KFF.org. All right. So just let's extrapolate those numbers out to today. So Medicare tells us, that's this source down here, number 2, data.cms.gov, that as of August 2024, so as of this month, there are 54 million people enrolled in Part D out of 67.3 million total Medicare beneficiaries. That's a 12.5% increase from 2021. So if we just apply that 12.5% increase to that number, that tells us that in 2025, when this goes into effect, there's about 1.7 million Part D enrollees that may exceed $2,000 in out-of-pocket cost. 3.1%. All right, so those are the same numbers. But, since 2021, there's been, 3 years of pretty stiff inflation. So let's err on the side of, safety there. Let's add 20%. I don't know if that's right, but it sounds fair if we add 20% to it for the last 2.5 years. That makes 2 million people out of 54 million people, or 3.7% of all Part D enrollees that stand to benefit from this $2,000 cap. That also means that there's 96.3% of everybody that's on Part D that will probably experience no positive benefits from this change, from this law. I'm not saying they're going to have negative effects. Probably going to pay higher premiums, probably going to pay our higher co-pays. Maybe some of your drugs may not be covered. Maybe some of your generic drugs that you're used to paying $0 for might be a couple of bucks or $5. I don't know. We don't know yet. We should have known by now, but we don't know yet because it's all still in flux. We just don't know. So this goes into effect. Remember, this bill was enacted 2 years ago. And so the insurance companies knew this was coming. The government knew it was coming. And so they've been planning for it. And so, I'm no statistician, but I can come up with these numbers here just from a Google search. What do you think the actuaries, the really, really smart mathematicians at the insurance companies are going, hey, we need to do something or we're gonna go broke. So they started raising their plans and filing their plans for the upcoming year with Medicare, with the government. They have to file them and get them approved by the government. They just don't put them out. The government approves them. And so when they did that, the government goes, whoa, wait a minute. This isn't good. You're about to go up on everybody's prices. Yeah, their out-of-pocket's going to be capped at $2,000, but that's only 2 million people. What about the other 52 million people that are going to be footing the bill for this? So they came out a month ago, the government did, Medicare, with what they are calling the Medicare Part D Premium Stabilization Demonstration Program. All right. Now, I read a big, long paper about this. Everybody in my industry is just, kind of running around with like chicken with their head cut off, or, Chicken Little saying the sky's falling. I'm kind of staying calm. I really know that it really doesn't matter. They're going to do what they're going to do. And my job is to help my clients figure out the best and safest path through it. But I need to be informed. So I read a big, long paper from a couple of different sources, just kind of research and data firms. I didn't include those sites here because they were didn't add to it. But what the Premium Stabilization Demonstration Program is, it's an optional program. It's not mandatory. Every Part D provider, so your Aetna, Humana, WellCare, SilverScript, United Health, all the Part D plans can, on a voluntary basis, participate in the program. And if they participate in the program, there's certain restrictions placed on them as to how much they can raise premiums. And it's not as much as they were going to, say, in I'm just making this up, so don't go call Aetna and say I said they were going to raise their premiums from $6 to $65. But if they're going to raise them to $65, they're going to participate in the stabilization program. They can only raise them a maximum of $35 per month. So if it's $6, they can raise them to $41 a month. That's the maximum they can go. But they're still losing money. They can't do that for very long, or they'll go out of business and everybody will be in trouble. So what happens? What is the Part D premium stabilization demonstration program? What is it actually? It is a subsidy for the insurance companies from the taxpayers to offset the unintended consequence of the Inflation Reduction Act on Medicare Part D. Okay. It was going to kill the insurance companies, which in turn we're going to be forced to pass that cost down to the consumer. And guess what? That's not a good thing to do in an election year. So Medicare, the government, the administration had to bail it out. So they had to bail out their own program. This year, it's voluntary. They're going to see how it works out, if it helps, if it provides any relief, and then they'll probably adjust the law according to what they learn during the demonstration program. Now, I want to point out this. I'm sorry, I always use this pointer on my screen as if you can see it, but then I realize you can't see it. So I'm going to use my little John Madden tool right here. This line right here comes from this source right here. The House Ways and Means Committee. This is a letter that the Ways and Means Committee wrote to the Congressional Budget Office requesting the CBO do an analysis of the Part D premium stabilization demonstration program, a cost analysis, and see what it was going to cost the taxpayer. That letter comes from a Republican-controlled committee, and there is some biased language in it. I took an excerpt that I felt was as factual as it could be. And it is factual based on the documents from the government, the documents from a data source. Milliman is the data source, if you're curious, that I read in my research on this. I mean, this is a month old. There's not a lot of information out there. You can Google it, and you can find some sources, and you can find this letter. So I just want to point that out. I'm trying to be as fair as I can. And I think this will probably be the only section of the presentation where you'll be able to get a read on my opinion. Hopefully, that's my goal. All right. Any questions so far? I think we've got a little bit of time, maybe a little bit ahead of time where I can answer some questions. If you have one, type it in the box. I forgot to mention, you're going to have to type your questions into the box. And the reason for that is because we just got too many people on and short period of time. So I'm not going to be able to unmute anybody and let you ask your questions verbally. So just type them in there and I'll try to get to them. All right, moving on. That was Medicare, current state of affairs.